My guest today is Erwin McManus, and he's been described as an iconoclast, as a pioneer, as someone who cares deeply about culture and art and creativity, and really thrives at the convergence of spirituality and creativity. And I'm thrilled to be in this conversation for a number of reasons. Number one, it's going to be interesting. Selfishly, I'm excited to be in this dialogue. But number two, I think this could be really informative for those of you who are thinking about ways to integrate these longings in their heart to make things and maybe make something of those things. His book, he's written many books, Soul Cravings, Chasing Daylight, and several others, but his most recent, which I found incredibly resourceful, is The Artisan Soul, and I'd encourage you guys to check it out. But Erwin, welcome.
Hey, so good to be with you, Dane. And thanks for describing me through the words of people who actually like me.
Well, it's funny, the nature of creating is, in a sense, a little rebellious, it seems to me. Like to be calling you an iconoclast is to break the norm, is to mix things up a little bit.
Yeah, whether we like it or not, creating is always a violation of the status quo. And so any person who owns their creative essence is going to be, in some sense, live a life of rebellion to something, whether it's mediocrity, whether it's tradition, whether it's deeply held beliefs, or whether it's toward oppression, slavery. The creative act is a courageous act because it violates what everyone knows to be true, to pursue that which seems unknowable.
And I'm guessing that would be, like you say, potentially offensive to some people.
It seems to be.
Yeah. Well, let's back up just a little bit. So,
what's your favorite color?
Blue.
Right. So if I said to you, that's really stupid. Do you know how many people like blue? I mean, why do you sell out to blue?
But you don't know the hue that I like. Mine is particular. It's special.
And that's what I think what the creative act feels like for people.
Yeah.
Even if you don't mean to create as a declaration against something.
Yeah.
The person who's holding on to what the creative process is endangering feels as if you've violated their blue space.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So let's give people some context for what got you to this expression. So, you have a substantive history and body of work in the Christian church. You have been a pastor at Mosaic. You're founder of that faith community here in Los Angeles. You have been. I think the first time I ever saw you was you were both presenting and also subbing for somebody at a Willow Creek. Someone couldn't do it. And you stepped in the gap. And
I'm a plan B.
Well, I say that as an affirmation because I remember thinking he must have done this one before because you nailed it. It was a sense of like it was a providential moment that you were there for just at the time as that. And you have been in the public eye for a lot of years. You also had a season where you were less in the public eye and doing some creativity in more of the business context and design and art and film. And I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit of your narrative as to what led you to this particular book.
Yeah, I used to write a lot of books, and about 6 years ago I stopped. The last book I wrote was called Wide Awake. And ironically, it was a book that focused on the process of taking a dream and turning it into your life. And found this was a really difficult space in the Christian conversation, in the faith conversation. And because of, I think, some of the conversations that came out of that, I kind of thought, I think I'm tapping out. I don't really want to write another book trying to create an engagement between spirituality and creativity, between what it means to have beliefs and what it means to have faith. Because I felt like Christianity had a lot of room for belief, but very little room for thought. A lot of room for conviction, but very, very little room for imagination. And for me, it felt suffocating. And so I took a hard right turn and went to the world of film and fashion, design, art, and just wanted to create beautiful things. And I felt that we really have underestimated the power of beauty to translate truth to the world. I feel like Christianity, especially in the Western world, has become more the disciples of John Stuart Mill's, and we've become incredibly utilitarian and pragmatic. And our message and our story has become almost like Legos rather than Play-Doh. And so I thought maybe I should just go do something else and find a different way of taking my story to the world, taking the story of Jesus to the world. And then 6 years later, I find myself writing The Artisan Soul, after spending several years in the world of fashion design and film and art, and really trying to come back to what I feel like is really central to the message of creativity and the essence of what it means to be human. Because even when I was working on suits and bags and other kinds of products, I think in some ways I've come back to remembering that the most important medium through which God creates is humans. And no matter what you can create in a film, or what you can create through a suit, or what you can create through a men's bag line, or whatever you can create through anything else, the most brilliant work of art is when you take a human life and you help translate that into its most beautiful expression. And I think that's why Mosaic is really important to me. That's why this book is really important to me, because your life should be your work of art. Your life should be your masterpiece. And I wanted to take the same principles to which we applied to try to create a great work of art and say, this is how you create your life into a work of art. And one of the core statements of the book is that we are all works of art and we're artists at work. And I think this is a dual statement that's really important to understand our essence as human beings, that we're works of art, that we're created by a creative God. But at the same time, we're also artists at work, that we're created to be creative by this creative God. Both of those are really essential to the human experience.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that tension of both being as you say, this kind of created being and a creative being. Both of those sound like identity statements to me. Or maybe the first is more identity and the second is more expression, or something like that. Could you say more a little bit about the uniqueness of those two roles that we play as humans?
Sure, I think everyone would agree we're created. The conflict is there intention in our creation? And atheists would obviously say, well, we're clearly created beings. But really what we're saying when we believe in God and we believe in the God of the Scriptures is that God created us with intention, that there's a design intelligence in the process. And so when we use this phrase, you're a work of art, what we're actually saying is that there's intention and thought and meaning behind your creation. And when I look at especially Genesis chapter 1, I'm just reminded that God designs with intention and intelligence, with motive, and that everything is created out of love for the intention of creating life. And that's, I think, an important part of our identity, is realizing that we're not accidental. We're not the spontaneous, chaotic result of something that happened mathematically, but that we're actually created with intention and meaning and thought. And that's why we as humans are sometimes haunted with our search for intention and meaning and thought. And I don't think being created in such an arbitrary way would have created in us this need for meaning. And we're also this work of art that has the capacity to create, which I think is actually the more difficult thing for us as followers of Christ. I don't know why, but somewhere along the way we were taught that if we thought of ourselves as creatives, we would be violating the sovereignty of God. That God's the only one who creates. Well, that would be a problem if he didn't create us to create. If God was so insecure about the creative process that he didn't give us any capacity to create, to imagine, to dream, then we would be living in rebellion by creating. And I actually think that's the story we've told the world. I think the way the world hears our story is there's a God who creates, and the sin that separates us from God is that we tried to be creative beings. And so you need to let that go. You need to obey, not create. And what I think is interesting is when I look at the Scriptures, I'm going, everything God commands us to do out of obedience is to give us freedom. And that freedom is there so that we can actually be creative beings again. So to me, the paradox is that the further we move from God, the less creative we become. And the closer we move to God, the more creative we become. So clearly this is not a violation of God's sovereignty, but in fact it is a declaration of God's goodness. And so I love to be reminded every day that I'm both a work of art, that I'm in process of something amazing is being created through my life, but I'm also an artist at work. God holds me accountable for the creative process. And that I'm designed by God to create that which is good and beautiful and true.
You tell a great story at the beginning of writing this book, back when it had a different title, of you with your wife, who you hold in high regard as a creative individual. And she self-identified a little differently. And as you were telling, I'd love it if you could tell the story, number one. But number two, it reminded me of the opening pages of The Little Prince, or Le Petit Prince, where what's getting exposed is this notion of adults used to remember when they were children they were creatives, and then somehow they unlearned it. And there's this, what I'm hearing echoing in these pages is this call to remember again, to investigate, to get messy, get in the granular with it. But could you tell that story a little bit and chat a little bit about this challenge of the narrative I'm telling myself that I'm not a creative, that I'm not an artist, and what we can do about it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the book is entitled Artisan Soul, but usually when I start writing a book, it's built around one word, and so it was just called Artisan. And when my wife came to ask me what I was writing about, I told her it's called Artisan, and her immediate response was, "Great, a book for people like you, but what about the rest of us?" And which really made me angry, because my wife is so artistic, she's so creative. Her aspiration was to be an actress, to be a comedian, and she was a mime. She's incredibly, she can sing, she can draw. There's just really nothing she can't do. But she can't escape the fact that when she was 8 years old, she was abandoned by her parents, eating nothing but turnip and ketchups. And that she lived in a foster home from the age of 8 to 18. That she was abandoned and forgotten, and she never heard the words "I love you" one time in her life. And those experiences in her life put in her a narrative that she was nothing, that she'd never amount to anything. Even the foster family she lived with would always tell her, "You're never going to amount to anything. You're going to be just like the rest of your family." And her last name, Lunsford, was like a curse. You're just going to be another Lunsford. And here she is, 5 decades later, the person who lives in a paradox of believing that God has something beautiful to do through her life, and the person who has all those voices who tell her life would never amount to anything. So she walked herself to church from the age of 9. And she said to God, "I'll do anything you want," at the age of 14. She realized education was her way out, so she finished high school, first one in her family. She received scholarships and graduated as the outstanding education student from the university she finished from. She got her master's degree in theology, and she still wonders what she could do and doesn't see herself as a creative. And I think this is the fundamental problem in the human spirit. It's not that we think too highly of ourselves. I think it's that we don't understand who we've been created to be. And the church has not been helpful. Somehow we've become convinced that if we can just pound into people, "You're a sinner," if we can pound the phrase total depravity into people, if we can pound into them what they're not, that this will create in them a desire for God. I had a journalist one time come to Mosaic and say, "You don't do a lot of moralizing. You don't sit around and tell everybody what's wrong with them." And I go, "Well, we have a heroic narrative. We actually think if we tell everyone what their life could become, they'll realize there's a massive gap between who they are and who they can become, and this will cause them to long for God and cry out to Him." And she goes, "Yeah, you expect a lot of people. You call everyone to heroic life." And she said, "Aren't you making it harder for people to accept your belief system? Isn't it harder for people to accept Jesus because you're calling them to too much?" And I said, this is a fundamental problem with religion, is that religion tries to control people through guilt and shame. We've moved into the sin management business, trying to make people less. And we want to see this messiness of calling people to more. We actually think that if we call people to their most noble, heroic, idealistic life, that this is what best awakens their soul to their need for God. And that to me is like the essence of the artisan soul. The moment you understand that you're a creative being, the moment you understand your imagination is the playground of God, the moment you begin to understand that all of us are artists and we are imagined to imagine, created to create, it's going to awaken things in you that are so much bigger than you that you're going to desperately need God. I don't need God because I'm trying to manage my sin. I need God because I don't want to live a lesser life than I was created to live.
I know that you were going to be speaking to a lot of people in sharing that story, so thank you for sharing that, because it's resonated in my own heart, and I've been in enough conversations where those limiting conversations that for whatever happened circumstantially in someone's life, choices they made, choices made against them, they've come into a belief of what they are and what they aren't. And from that place, it seems like they're interested, many, the courageous ones, are interested in changing. And in a sense, this is just context, but in a sense, change seems to be one of the most talked about subjects, but one of the least actualized subjects. And if change is a form of creativity of sorts, I was I'm curious if you could just comment a little bit on how you view change, and then I have a follow-up question to
It's
that.
funny, the first book I ever wrote, An Unstoppable Force, has a chapter called Change Theology. And I became a follower of Christ in college, and I was going to go do something else, but they said, you seem to be really zealous and, it's really on fire, and so you need to go to seminary. I didn't even know what a seminary was. And I dropped out after my first semester, and then I went back because a professor asked me to come back and help him with a project, but not because I felt like what I was learning was actually valuable. Because I realized that there is no theology of change. They were teaching us the same stuff that was taught 100 years ago, even strategically, not just theologically. And really, if our thinking process leads to exact same view of everything that we had 500 years ago, what's the point of spending 4 years reviewing that? And I felt like what has happened is the church walks into the future facing backwards. But what's so ironic to me is that, like this phrase, Solomon's words, there's nothing new under the sun. I've heard that all over the world. I've heard Christian leaders quote that all over the world, where there's nothing new under the sun. And that was the pat on top of the head I received for like the first 10 years of my life. Whenever I'd come in with an idea or come in
Like
with
condescendingly?
Oh, yeah. Erwin, son,
bless your heart.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun. And then I went back and read Ecclesiastes, and I realized that we disagree with almost everything Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, but we hold on to that one. And the guy began the book by saying, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. Why are we going to choose our worldview from a guy who says there's no meaning in life? And because actually life is packed with meaning. And he's actually telling us what life without God looks like. He also said in it that there's no difference between humans and animals, that we all go to the same place. I don't know a Christian that believes that, but we believe there's nothing new under the sun. But in Isaiah 43, verses 18 and 19, God says, put away the former things, do not dwell on the past. Behold, I'm doing a new thing. And now it springs up, will you even be aware of it? So I'm going, okay, Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun, and we believe that. But God says, I'm doing a new thing. Do we actually believe that? In fact, everywhere God gets involved, something's new. New song, new wine, new covenant, new heart, new creation, new spirit, new heaven, new earth. God's in the new and section of history, and we want to keep him in the old section of history. And so for me, it's kind of ironic that the church has become the last bastion of protection for the past, rather than the epicenter of creating the future. And I remember one time we were at this huge festival, and the lead singer for this band, Christian band, says, "Let's change history," and everybody cheered. And I stood in the back and I said, you know what's really strange? If I said, let's create the future, no one would cheer, but he'd say, you're a heretic. But the one thing you can't change is history. Let's change history. Well, you can't change history.
It's done.
It's done. It's been written. And we're so reticent in our relationship to the future that we yell out, let's change history, rather than let's create the future. And the only way you, quote, change history, you can't change it. You can write history. You can make history. And the only way you make history is by creating the future. And so I think we ought to just step back and kind of like laugh at ourselves and going, I tell people, if Newton lived today, he would not agree with Newton.
That's so good.
And what are we doing? Holding to worldviews of people who lived in the 1300s, who still were not sure that the world was round and that the earth revolved around the sun. And we get our anthropology from people who did not understand what it meant to be human. But the scriptures really do understand what it means to be human. So we got to go back, dig deep, and listen to what it says. I'm convinced there is something new under the sun, and that every person who connects to God is a part of creating the new.
I want to stay here for a second, because we're having this conversation in the context of a particular moment in history where the digital revolution is no longer the revolution, it's the establishment. Everything's been commoditized by digital. If you're a musician, you don't need a label. If you're a writer, you don't need a press anymore. There's a flattening, as many have talked about, where it seems everyone has access to be able to express themselves, to make things. And I'm wondering if the era we're living in, and by the way, I haven't forgotten my question about change. I'm going to come back around to that. But I'm wondering if the era we live in, and even what you're saying, I'm reminded of another hero to me, is a guy named Seth Godin. He wrote The Icarus Deception, and Seth, and in The Icarus Deception, he's basically in this moment of history calling people out to fly closer to the sun, to defy this kind of hubris. And not in an arrogant way per se, but in a risking it might not work out kind of way. And given that so many people can do that, I know that there are going to be critics who will say, wait a second, if everyone's an artist, or if everyone's a writer, or if doesn't that cheapen the act itself? And I know you've heard this question before, but I'm curious how you respond to that.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of bipolar on this, because Icarus did, he paid the price of flying too close to the sun. He just happened to fly higher than everyone else, though. And, so there are people who would say, hey, I'll live with melted wings, because I just want to be able to fly higher than anyone else has ever flown before. And I think a part of the dilemma is that we keep learning right lessons and wrong lessons from life. And so, with the democratization of art, everyone becomes a writer, everyone becomes a singer, everyone becomes a voice, everyone's a politician, everyone's a critic. In fact, the internet has probably been the most destructive thing for Christianity in 200 years. And not because of pornography, but because of the meanness and unChristlikeness among people, because now you can destroy everyone. And you can say anything about anyone. I can tell you things were written about us, about me on websites, and we would call the people and say, hey, we're happy to talk with you and show you that I actually don't believe these things, that you're actually misquoting me and misstating who I am, and they don't care. Because their fame is by attacking people who have actually accomplished things. So you have this dark side of it, that everyone gets their fame by being against something rather than being for something. Everyone gets their fame by destroying rather than creating. And no one has to go through the process of earning the right to be heard. And so, what we've lost is that journey of credibility, where people, when they speak, have earned the right to be heard. When they're publishing, like someone came up to me this morning, probably around 20 years old, and said, hey, I've written a book. How do I get it published? I said, well, first you need to go live a life. But how do I get it published? She just wouldn't even listen to me, because she needs to be published. And I go, what you need to do is go live a life worth writing about first. And then, write out of that. She goes, but how do I get published? And I said, well, have your friends read your book. And if your friends are moved by your book, that's a good starting point. But how do I go? Well, if you start letting your friends read the book and it changes their life, they'll give it to friends who will change their life. I guarantee you a publisher will come to you. So we live in a world where bad music is available to everyone. And we also live in a world where brilliant artists who would never have a chance have a chance to have their voices heard to the world. I prefer that world. I prefer a world where, even with everyone who will write every wrong thing about me and and slander me left and right, I prefer a world where everyone has a voice. I still think it's a better world. Even though you may have to listen to 10,000 terrible artists to find that one voice that may never have an opportunity to have a record deal because they don't have the right look or the right feel, and then suddenly that voice emerges. I love that world. As a writer, I prefer a world where everyone can write and everyone can publish and have their own publishing house. Because if I have something to say, my book will emerge out of that mass of sound. Because in the end, people are not looking for sounds; they're looking for a voice. They're not looking for echoes; they're looking for a voice. They have too much out there, so they're looking for that thing that speaks to them at the deepest level. And I have such confidence that beauty always rises to the top.
Embedded in what you're saying, and actually connects to the question I wanted to get back to, is there's a lot of perceptions out there around how you can relate with failure. So even in the scenario you just described, I make my best work I think I've ever made. I put it out there. The metrics, the feedback is, it's not that meaningful. It doesn't land for anybody. I can relate with that in a lot of different ways. And as an artisan soul, and even as we turn a corner towards the end of this conversation, I want to honor your time. I'm just conscious to the listener or the viewer who is engaging in this conversation intimately and saying, "What about me? Like, I'm scared. I want to be courageous and live out of that. I'm hearing a call in my gut, and I know the soul part of your title is significant to you. My friend Todd Henry says cover bands don't change the world. Like, you want the authentic self to come out. Talk a little bit about failure and how you've related with failure and how you would encourage others to join the ranks of leaning into that.
Yeah, when you asked me how do I relate to failure, my immediate thought was, well, failure is life.
Here we go again.
Yeah. I'm like, to ask me how I relate to failure is like, how have you stayed alive? Because I've failed so much more than I've ever had success. And but
that's not the perception, right? I mean, I think that when people are known quantities like yourself, there's this belief that, oh no, like everything you touch is gold. That's just how it happens, and maybe folks don't get a chance to see the stub toes.
Well, my friends do. My family does, and it's funny with my daughter Mariah. When she first started working on music, I said, I will help finance everything that's original, but if you do covers, I won't help you at all. And I said, I don't want you to be the best imitation of someone else's talent. I want you to discover your own voice. And she wrote a song when she was 14 that ended up being the lead song for the season finale of Grey's Anatomy. And she would have never had that opportunity or that experience if she didn't risk at writing songs that other people wouldn't listen to. And she used to come over here to the Biola Youth Theater and audition, and she never got a part. She would come home crying, going, I know I can sing better than those other girls, but I can't get picked. And I didn't want to tell her she didn't have the right look. I didn't want to tell her she didn't feel like what they're looking for, because Mariah's been always real eccentric in her own person, and I said, if you want to sing, you need to go find your audience. So she gave up after several years of trying to get into the youth theater as a singer and started going and singing in nightclubs on Sunset Strip and Melrose and writing music that connected to that audience sitting in that little dingy room where they would bring her in at 14 and they have to usher her out because she wasn't 21.
Couldn't get the stamp.
Bring her in at 16. Yeah, she was like, and I just watched her music grow and develop, and her story kind of emerge out of that. But there was a lot of tears, and a lot of risk, and out of failure has really come like a refinement of the person she is. For me, it's like, I cannot tell you how many times I've sat down alone by myself just weeping, going, hey, what's the deal? I had a company, and I watched my partner make a decision where we lost a $5 to $6 million company in one day. I had just put in all the money I had made, and I had almost $750,000 disappear on a day, about $1 million. And I couldn't even eat for a month. I lost 20 pounds. I had to fly home to tell my wife that I lost everything. There's nothing more humiliating than having to sit down in front of your wife, who was an orphan and a foster child and never had a home of her own or a place of her own, and say, I just lost everything. And I could tell you in that moment when she looked at me without any hesitation and said, I thought I was your everything. It did something inside of me I can't even explain. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just said, I lost my other everything. And to me, it's like people want, when they come, how do I get your life? I go, you don't get my life on the highs if you don't want my life on the lows. If you're not willing to take the level of risk and experience the level of pain and know the level of failure I've experienced, then I don't know how to help you move to a level of success or influence or voice. Because if there's anything that good has happened in my life that people see publicly, it is built on the rubble of all the times we struggled and failed and suffered, and it was sweat and tears and blood that created those things where everybody goes, wow, you have a great life. And you know what's strange? That pain is a part of my great life. It's not the success that makes life so sweet. It's the success in the contrast to the sacrifice and suffering that you've been through. That's the only thing that gives it any meaning, any wonder, any beauty. And so I think the tragedy is that studies show us that if you have high confidence in your talent, you're more likely to take fewer risks. If you actually have a lower confidence in your talent but a higher commitment to work hard, you're actually willing to take greater risks. And I think the great tragedy in our culture is that we've raised up a generation that we've told you're awesome before they ever risked deeply or profoundly. And I keep telling people, look, you're only going to go as far as your wounds will take you. And you have to like be willing to jeopardize your self-image, your view of yourself, by failing, by risking, by falling short, by walking through the rubble in life and going, okay, I wasn't everything I thought I was, but I'm more than I knew I was. And I think that's what God takes us through. It's like he takes us through these trials and these challenges and these moments of huge disruption. Not just to give us a sense of perspective, but also to see how resilient and powerful we also are. The power isn't in how successful you can become. The power is how many failures you can overcome. And I go, man, you want to know how strong I am? It's not when you see the victory. It's when you see us moving the rocks off of our chest when we failed and we say, we will not give up. I think that to me is like the fun, the joy, the wonder of living life as an adventure, living out. I said to create is to live a life of courage. And when people say, yeah, but I'm not a dancer, I'm not a painter, I'm not a writer, what do? I go, look, focus on two things. Live a life of love, because all great art is an expression of love. So live a life of love and live a courageous life. And press into your fears. Whenever you feel terrified, lean in that direction. Don't let shadows become walls. Because whenever you move toward the darkness, you bring light. And if you live a life of love and live a life of courage, and always keep hope in front of you that tomorrow will be better than today, that you will be better than you are, that you can create out of your imagination a better world and a better reality, and that God is the one who's always infusing in you a future and a hope, I think it's going to be okay.
Erwin, what a treat. The Artisan Soul, Erwin McManus, it's an invitation to hope. That's how I read it.
Yeah.
And a challenge to courage and bravery. And I thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much, Dane.
Yeah.
God bless.